From 1866 to 2016, we celebrate Noble and Greenough School. 150 years, a century and a half. Noble's classical school began as the Civil War concluded, founded by a 30-year-old George Washington Copp Noble, a graduate of Phillips Exeter and Harvard College. It was started as a school for 10 young men of well-to-do families. It had a specific curriculum, the study of Greek, Latin, mathematics, and penmanship, devoted to a specific outcome: pass the Harvard College entrance examination and be admitted to Harvard College. Who were the formative leaders of this community? How did this community evolve? If we draw a line between them and us and reflect upon our relationship with them, how does this history inform what we take for granted and what we celebrate on a daily basis? In 1866, the Noble's Classical School commenced in an economic post-war boom, essentially as a one-room, albeit urban, schoolhouse at 2.5 Pemberton Square in Boston. In the early years, the faculty never numbered more than 4. In fact, we have little details of the institution until it was formally incorporated 47 years later, in 1913. We know that George Washington Copp Noble was born in Somersworth, New Hampshire in 1836. His words upon his graduation from Harvard reflect an amiable and self-deprecating voice, but showed no particular bent towards education. "My life has been like that of most boys. I went to college and school because I was sent, and got along as best I could." In fact, Noble began law school before changing course and graduating with an AM from Harvard. Recently married, with the birth of his first child, Noble headed out to Washington University in St. Louis as a professor of classics before returning home 2 years later to found his school. In 1 year's time, the school moved to larger quarters at 40 Winter Street. The school was able to expand and lease quarters there until 1884. When the owner reclaimed the space, the 18-year young school moved to 174 Tremont Street, then West Cedar Street, followed by 97 Beacon Street, and finally 100 Beacon Street, the final in-town location before the school set forth for its home in 1922 at 507 Bridge Street, later to become 10 Campus Drive in Dedham, Massachusetts. In the late 1880s and early 1890s, due to its remote location on West Cedar Street, as well as the age and growing deafness of Mr. Noble, enrollment started a precipitous slide. By 1891, the size of the graduating class was down to 6. Fortunately for the school, in 1887, James J. Greenough had married Mr. Noble's eldest daughter. Greenough came from a family of educators, his father being a famous professor of classics at Harvard. Greenough had graduated from Harvard himself with a degree in mathematics and had taught for 5 years at the Hopkinson School. In 1892, at the age of 30, he made a proposition to Mr. Noble to share ownership of the school. Writing to a friend in a tone that invokes a voice recognizable to any Noble student or faculty of the past century, "The risk is large and chances perhaps against rather than for us at the start. But now is my time, I think, if ever, and now, at any rate, I'm going to try it." Immediately, Mr. Greenough set upon returning the school to a more relevant location on Beacon Street. More importantly, Mr. Greenough, with a new energy and fervor, began to add to the school's mission by laying the foundation of a liberal education, science labs, a school newspaper, a wholehearted commitment to extracurricular athletic activities. Mr. Greenough sought to create school traditions, provide the school with its motto, Spes sibi quisque, a passage from Virgil's Aeneid, which, roughly translated, means that each person must find hope in him or herself. These words were imprinted on the medals awarded to victors of Noble's athletic competitions. It was an extremely successful collaboration. Mr. Noble remained the beloved founder and figurehead of the school, Mr. Greenough handled all the day-to-day administrative and disciplinary affairs. The size and the reputation of the institution soared. At Mr. Greenough's untimely death in 1913 from cancer at the age of 51, the Noble and Greenough School was 200 strong. The school found itself at a crossroads. In 1913, Mr. Noble was 77 years old and was hardly in a position to resume day-to-day leadership of the school. Yet, as described by others, Mr. Noble continued to display the characteristics that Nobles, to this day, continues to cherish. He bestowed kindness, sincerity, and humility, and was ever concerned with the welfare of those other than himself. Perhaps it was these qualities, along with the school's legacy of 47 years, that inspired a graduate from the class of 1876, Richard M. Saltonstall, to become the school's first board president. By pressing for the formal incorporation of the school as a nonprofit institution, Saltonstall created the means by which to transfer ownership and an orderly recompense for the investments of Mr. Noble and the widow of Mr. Greenough, while simultaneously providing greater likelihood of the school's perpetuity. And in 1917, Saltonstall also oversaw a merger with the Volkman School, a peer institution in Boston whose enrollment had drastically declined during World War I due to its headmaster's, Arthur Volkman's, German origins. On June 7th, 1919, at the age of 83, after having overseen the education of over 800 young men, George Washington Copp Noble died, and the search for a new headmaster intensified. Charles Wiggins II, an alumnus of Pomfret, had roomed and rode at Harvard with a Noble's graduate, John Richardson, who was shortly to join and remain on the board of the school for 43 years. Wiggins' initial passion in life was design and architecture, but ultimately he was drawn back to his alma mater, Pomfret, as associate headmaster. In agreeing to become the head at Noble's, Wiggins wasted no time in making his case for significant changes. In his first report to the board in November of 1920, after complimenting the faculty, he wrote simply and with candor, "The material equipment is not adequate, and it is not up to the standard of schools of a similar type. The present building is awkward in arrangement. The grounds are not large enough to meet the demands of a school professing to supply athletic recreation for all its members." Mr. Wiggins then proposed 3 remedies, the most ambitious of which was accepted by the Board of Trustees. Procuring of land on the outskirts of Boston to be arrived at by train, electric car, or motor bus, and which will offer all the advantages of the present boarding school in its outdoor arrangements. 54 locations were considered. 12 were to be visited. The new headmaster of Nobles, who had neither automobile nor driver's license, promptly acquired both and discovered a castle. The castle at Riverdale in Dedham, then a small suburb of 10,000, was originally the vision of railroad and textile magnate Albert W. Nickerson. Nickerson's dream estate was an expression rooted in wealth and accumulation. As a primary symbol of Noble's lore, spirit, and soul, it has become a vision dedicated to a belief in community and one's ability to shape the world by caring for the public good.
There is no other building that connects graduates, current students, faculty, former faculty, parents, like the castle.
The castle is one of my favorite parts of Nobles. It's just such a beautiful symbol for it, but also so much happens here.
It would be fair to say that this first bricks and mortar purchase of $102,000 by the Noble and Greenough Corporation of the castle and accompanying grounds designed by Frederick Law Olmsted was the most significant and pivotal moment in the school's history. It was a significant geographic and philosophical departure. First and foremost, however, the castle represented the school's first true home.
And I remember the first time that I came to campus, it felt magical. Like I'm I don't even exaggerate when I said that. You drive into the campus and you just feel that there's something in the air that is special, that's unique, that you will be cared for. But I think short of that magic and in the atmosphere, I think it's definitely the faculty. It's no secret that my receiving line at graduation, I was holding up the entire line because I was just crying and hugging every single teacher.
Through it all, Charles Wiggins sustained a blend of religious and secular morality wrapped around a balance of academic, athletic, and artistic endeavors. Annually, his assembly readings always included his adaptation of a definition of a gentleman. A man who is too brave to lie, too generous to cheat, and who insists on doing his share of work in any capacity. A man who thinks of his neighbor before he thinks of himself. In 1931, Charles Wiggins hired Elliott Putnam, a former Harvard quarterback, to teach French and to coach the school's football team. And in 1937, Putnam became assistant to the headmaster. In 1938, he married the headmaster's daughter, Laura Elizabeth Wiggins. With the onset of World War II, the school's enrollment continued to drop. Gas rationing, the 18-year-old draft, parents away in service were profoundly challenging factors. As importantly, beginning in 1941, Charles Wiggins' health declined. By November of 1943, he was dead at the age of 57. To a friend, Putnam wrote, "No one not here can know the shock of the boss's going. The ship is still on course, but the rigging is broken. We'll bring her to port, but from there on, I don't know what the future is." Shortly thereafter, Elliott Putnam was asked to take over as head of school. At the age of 35, Elliott Putnam leapt into action, literally, as legend has it, going door to door in Dedham, proselytizing, seeking greater enrollment. Mr. Putnam was perceived as an enthusiastic, unflappable optimist, a man's man. He was hands-on. By the end of the war, the number of students had increased 75% to 136. In 1947, he stated, "Our primary goal is to produce boys who will seek responsibility. If a school can develop this sense of civic duty, using its own community as a proving ground for citizenship, then it is fulfilling its primary function."
He was a very important force in my life.
Well, he's my idol. He was headmaster, as you know, from 1943 to 71, having taught here from 1930 on.
He was gruff and tough. No, he was, he didn't fool around, and you didn't fool around.
His disappointment hurt. You knew what he stood for.
A hand on somebody's shoulder in the Putnam years made all the difference in that person's. You'd think from listening to them that their lives were completely changed by that one pat on the shoulder.
For the better part of his life, Elliott Putnam oversaw that primary goal, along with campus development and growth. He saw the school grow to 240 students, persevered through the turmoil of the late 60s. But in 1970, as the board anticipated the transition to coeducation, Elliott Putnam made the decision to step down to make way for the change.
One of the things that Ted insisted upon was 50-50.
Boy, did we admire him and feel respected by him. He had a wonderful laugh, a wonderful manner from the stage, and so he too set a tone for this place that I think was such a positive, energized, loving environment.
We were his flock, and he was shepherding us.
I have no doubt that Mr. Gleason's speeches from the assembly stage are part of what made me fall in love with Noble's.
He would listen to you, but he would tend to his plants. He would pluck off a dead leaf, or he'd trim back some part of the plant, and I think it really was an active metaphor for him. He was tending to our needs.
The Reverend Edward Stone Gleason was known to all as ESG, but went by the name Ted. Like the founder, George Noble, he too was a graduate of Phillips Exeter and Harvard. While Nobles had dabbled with conducting classes and had even considered a merger with the Windsor School, Ted's charge was to shepherd the process of coeducation. Within a matter of years, Gleason brought the ratio of young women and men to parity. As the size of the school increased, he hired and empowered a group of strong female and male faculty, 2 of whom would succeed him in leading the school. By the time he left Nobles in 1987, the school was further diversified and thriving at 440 students strong. All the while, Ted's ability to recognize, know, and use even the middle names of each student in the 6 Nobles classes was legendary, as were the assemblies he led. His wit and mastery of language, always in service to the spiritual life of Nobles, as well as a life of service to others, was constant. Expanding upon the meaning of the word family, as defined by his predecessors, Gleason perceived the importance of morning assemblies as an essential daily communal ritual that informed and defined the life and spirit of the school.
I'd say assembly is the beating heart of Nobles.
When you miss out on assembly, you miss out on what's going on in the school. And it's like a 20-minute Broadway show in about 6 or 7 acts. So everybody who goes up there is supported.
Unheard voices can be heard.
When you miss it, you sort of don't feel like you actually were at school that day. I mean, that's the truth.
It was something that was going to put a smile on my face. Simple as that.
In 1987, Ted Gleason passed the baton to Dick Baker, a former military man and graduate of Harvard and UC Berkeley, who was a reluctant but brilliant head of school. He'd been hired by Gleason in 1971 as an English teacher, a self-proclaimed subversive. Upon Gleason's retirement in 1987, the board invited Baker to take the warm family spirit that Gleason had created and inject some of the discipline and fortitude of his training to ensure that Nobles would stay competitive with its very best peers.
He inspired. He inspired. And it wasn't just goading, he was engaging.
For 15 years, I had enjoyed an incredibly marvelous experience as a teacher. My feeling was that Ted Gleason worked very hard to allow me to do that. So it was my turn. It was a duty.
Making sure the school was known for academic rigor and excellence, changed some of our language and changed some of the way in which we spoke about the community, put some people at ease and made it clear that we intended to include and welcome a wide array of people.
The student body and the faculty were going to evolve and look more like the real world.
While he worked tirelessly to reinvigorate the academic ethos of the school, Baker didn't forget that communities, like families, require emotional care and support. It was he who hired the first dean of students, Erica Guy, who retired from Nobles in 2013 and became a legend in her own right. Her most famous mantra, "Never worry alone." And it was his greatest desire to return to the classroom at Nobles to teach English, which he does today. Bob Henderson, a 1976 Nobles graduate and student under Ted Gleason, became head of school in 2000, poised to build upon the work of his predecessor. And it is perhaps testament to the nature of and trust in their relationship that allowed Dick Baker to continue to teach at Nobles. Baker's insistence on ramping up the school's academic program laid a foundation that allowed Henderson the freedom to focus on elevating other elements of a Nobles education. Among Henderson's successes have been developing student services, which include college, academic, and psychological counseling. His philosophy, hiring good people and letting them do their work.
Bob Henderson has been the perfect head for where we've been going in the 21st century.
Has really been careful about appreciating the past, but also wanting to sort of set the school up for the next phase. And I think he's just done it so beautifully.
So good at so many different aspects of the job. That's what continues to impress me even to this day.
He helps the kids to see that learning and being an academic is cool.
He believes in the arts. He import of creative and imaginative pursuits by young people.
And his relationship to this place is so clear and so deep.
More kids, different kinds of kids, can feel really at home, can feel really valued.
His ability to be at 10,000 feet and to look far over the horizon.
Bob always has the kids at the forefront of his mind. He's uncanny in terms of the way that I feel that he connects with kids and understands them.
What I want, and what I believe schools are built on, are people who can actually do it. Day in and day out with kids. Connect, change lives, make it happen. And the theory means nothing if you don't have that.
During his tenure, the metrics have been the envy of nearly any educational institution in the country. A graduate giving rate of close to 50%, soaring applications resulting in an acceptance rate of 20%, at a school that has now grown to over 600 students. Matriculation lists that include the country's best colleges and universities. And fiscal health that allows for generous financial aid budget and resource allocation, such as the recent creation of the Excel program, the school's Center for Experiential and Community-Based Education. All of this from a simple, straightforward educational concern for 10 boys that began shortly after the Civil War ended. 6 heads of school over the past 150 years. One indication of the synergy, loyalty to, and belief in the mission of the school.
And I think the school has had good fortune with its headmasters.
I've known 5 headmasters, each one very different than his predecessor, and each one was just right for the time.
And the types of relationships have changed and become much more complex, and society's become more complex. But the friendships, the relationships, the mentorship, that has not shifted in the close to 150-year history of this school.
You can change dress code, you can change requirements, you can change curriculum, but if at the core you've got these terrific connections between young people and mentors, that's almost all that matters.
This is a community school.
Community, hands down.
So you're not really done until you're sharing it or you're giving it back.
It's those little things that make the difference. It's the interaction now.
I know that I'm gonna have to pack up and leave soon, but it's always gonna be my home. Go Nobles! Yes!
It is clear that the success and strength of the Nobles community has come from leaders who sought to stand upon the shoulders of their predecessors and build upon and refine the values of the community they inherited. The tie that binds remains rooted in the kindness of a benevolent and beloved scholar. George Washington Cobb Noble believed that one person modeling humility and continually placing others before himself could make a difference. This belief is again and again exemplified in this history of Nobles. And in 2016, in every classroom, studio, practice, rehearsal, and assembly, this belief, this memory, continues to resonate and flourish.